If you had a few words to describe Donald Trump's first 100 days in office, what would they be? Exhausting? Energizing? Infuriating? Decisive?
The 5 most disturbing and concerning words that I hear over and over again. I want my country back. Your country? And from who? From me? You want your country back from me? It's my country too.
Hi, and welcome back to the Front Porch Movement, a podcast devoted to civic engagement, where we cut through the polarizing rhetoric and talk to real people about their hopes, dreams, and, these days, our divided country. I'm your host, Ted Canova. This divide is something Ray Suarez has covered during his career with NPR, PBS, and Al Jazeera America. But it's more striking than ever. So I was curious how he sees the changes the country is going through and yet to go through. We sat down for a candid conversation on a sunny day just a few blocks from where he grew up in Brooklyn. The neighborhood, just like America, is changing before our eyes. New immigrants pass by, new glass skyscrapers growing above, and historic brownstones trying to keep a place we remember. At a time when journalists are being discredited, Ray has been called a national resource. He's covered 4 presidential elections and reported from 7 political conventions. These days, he's taking a break from full-time reporting, but he's still busy, talking across the country about the political climate, about to start teaching at Amherst College in Massachusetts, while also filling in at NPR. Ray Suarez, you're in big demand these days. A veteran.
Not enough demand. Not enough demand.
Well, we're going to get you that job, I promise. But, you've seen news coverage change over 30 years, and we're really in a place that we may not have been before. Everybody points to Nixon, but I think it's different, don't you?
I do, because back in the Nixon days, when Nixon was trying to turn the press into an enemy, the public still had a great deal of confidence in what the printed press and the broadcast media was putting out. Now we have a president who is actively trying to discourage the public believing what we have to say, but he's doing it in an atmosphere where the trust in institutions in general and in the news business in particular is way, way down. So it's much more destructive, much more dangerous.
Well, one of the easy ways for Trump to get by with this is the proliferation of news organizations. In Nixon's day, it was 3 channels and PBS. Now people get their news from news feeds on their phones. There's hundreds of liberal and conservative sites. There's bloggers, there's Facebook, there's fake news. Don't you think it's easier right now for Trump to kind of confuse, or any politician for that matter, to confuse the public because we're exhausted with all this information?
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that makes it dangerous. When the president says things that simply are not true, not opinion, not shades of meaning, not an honest disagreement, but simply not true, the news business goes and does its conventional thing and points out that what he said was not true, and he can then go and take shelter in a whole new media ecosystem that did not exist in the old days, that will affirm what he said, even though it's not true. That is a recipe for public confusion. It is not a recipe for running a society where we even begin on the same patch of land to have our debates to figure out how to move forward. We're talking at each other from different universes of meaning. It's a very, very different world.
In the media, we used to ask the public to be good news consumers, for them to go out and seek the truth, for them to either go to the library in the olden days or now just Google things and learn for themselves. But it seems that there's just too much information coming at them every hour. For them to actually get media literacy, it seems like a far-fetched idea that the public could take responsibility for deciphering this on their own.
I think we're asking a lot of a public to enter a more crowded, confused information marketplace and just blithely say, oh, sort it out for yourselves. I'm not sure, and I have to be clear here, I'm not sure what the answer is. For once, I'm kind of flummoxed. I'm not sure what I would tell a people. Because go figure it out on your own is the antithesis of what we've been telling them for the decades that lead up to today. We've been telling them we're the guys with the answers and gals. We're the people who have gone to this place, shot footage of what's going on there, talked to people, done research, looked at the data, looked at the stats, sifted that, synthesized it, and now we're presenting you the reality that we went and found. Isn't it weird that in addition, we're also going to tell you, be good consumers and check things out for yourself? We're the guys who did the checking for you. So I'm not sure where all this ends up.
We're approaching the 100th day of Trump's administration, and that used to be kind of a phony benchmark of just a round number of how they're doing. Like, who could possibly have that much impact in 100 days? But he has had an impact every day in some way, don't you think?
But in kind of bizarre, unprecedented kind of ways. He's taken embarrassing stories for any administration that normally would have been one-day stories or 2 news cycle stories and made them week-long stories by continuing public feuds and continuing to tweet out outraged hits at different parts of the news business. He has done things and said things to foreign leaders in public addresses that just graph outside the normal conventional parameters of what you would expect from presidents of both parties over the entire post-war decades. I mean, from FDR on to the last days of the Obama administration, there's a fairly predictable ambit of what presidents say, how they say it, the things they say to the public, the things they try to encourage the public on. And now we have a president who graphs outside that, and for better or worse. Do I hope that Trump is a great president that does good things for the country? Absolutely. I don't want to see my country not succeed, so it's not about that. I'm just observing, as someone who's been covering politics for decades, that this guy is not like any of his predecessors. It'll be up to the public to decide whether that's a good thing or a bad thing.
So we're 100 days in, but we're pretty much 160 days since the election. Having to reflect in these 5 months, what happened to America on election night?
I think millions of people, and for different reasons, said, I'm really pissed off. I know that this guy doesn't know anything about how the federal government works. I know because coverage day after day kept pointing out as he misidentified events, misidentified ideas about where America's diplomacy stood, demonstrated that he didn't understand the state of play in different parts of the economy. I don't care about that stuff. That's just details. I'm telling you that here is my great big middle finger. I'm not doing as well as I thought I should be. I'm tired of being lied to. I'm tired of being told that this is happening for my own good when I know it's not for my own good. When NAFTA was introduced, you told me that only low-skilled, low-sophistication jobs were going to go to Mexico and that we were going to keep the best jobs here. That didn't happen. When we put millions of people out of work on Mexican farms, they didn't stay down in Mexico. They came here, and they live in my town, and they work on the farms in my state. And I just don't recognize this world, and this wasn't the world that I was counting on growing up in. We who live in big cities, who live in the biggest metropolitan areas, who live in the most immigrant-heavy parts of the country, see the country in one way because it's the reality that we live. Unremarkably. I mean, here we are in Brooklyn. The neighborhoods adjacent to where we're sitting on this bench have changed 3 and 4 and 5 times in the last 150 years. But the people who come from places that haven't changed that much see the world and see the country in a very different way. Not a better way, not a worse way, just a different way. And they had their say on Election Day.
How do you self-identify yourself ethnically?
I'm Puerto Rican. And I'm a New Yorker.
We can hear that.
And this new thing, a Latino, because that's an identity that's been created by people coming from multiple countries and living together and settling here in the United States and creating this thing that didn't exist back home. So my daughter lives in Spanish Harlem, and she talks every morning to the flower seller on her corner who's from Puebla. And when he looks at my daughter, he doesn't say, oh, I'm a different thing. I'm Mexican and she's Puerto Rican. He sees her as kind of a part of a greater community. From outside looking in, Americans see 55 million Latinos as kind of a large, undifferentiated brown lump, while from inside the group looking out, we often see each other as slightly different, and depending on your preferences, you either reject or embrace the Latino idea. But when I was a kid, if you went to Texas or Southern California and you turned on the radio, you only heard Mexican music. And similarly, if you turned on the radio in Boston or Philadelphia or New York, you only heard Caribbean music, period. And now if you go to San Antonio and you get your rental car at the airport and start driving south toward Victoria, Texas, you hear Caribbean music on the radio. Why? Because there's this new thing that's growing up here in the generations after the pioneer people get here. So Juan Luis Guerra and 440 go and play in Chicago, where there were very few, almost no Dominicans, and the show sells out in a matter of hours, not because the Dominicans of Chicago, who don't exist, went out and sold out the Rosemont Horizon, but because there is this pan-Latin culture growing up in the United States that I think we make a mistake if we miss. It's a thing that is not just Dominican, it's not just Puerto Rican, it's not just Mexican, but it's aspects of all of it, as there's a kind of political and cultural maturity and transformation that's going on here in the United States, shaped by life here.
Do you think some of this transformation scared some Americans? It didn't take many to turn the election, but the immigrant experience, 2016 was supposed to be the year of the Latino vote, that the Democrats had this in hand, that the Latino vote was monolithic and they would vote 92-8 the way the African American vote would go. And it just didn't happen. The Latinos didn't bring Hillary to the White House.
Well, the places that Hillary lost that she was supposed to win, losing Wisconsin by a couple of thousand votes and losing Michigan by a couple of thousand votes, the Latino vote in both those places was not going to swing the election for Hillary Clinton. Yes, she lost Florida, and Florida would have made a big difference, but Cubans came home to the Republican Party. Let's not forget that Latinos still voted 72-28 or 24 or something like that. You know, Donald Trump got a couple of percentage points more than Mitt Romney did. He didn't do much better. He got a couple of percent, 24%, something like that. That's not a great foundation stone to build the future on if you're a member of the Republican Party.
And then what did that do to middle America? The rhetoric over and over that someone's taking my jobs or someone's going to make my future less secure. Do you think that that had as much of a invisible impact on the outcome of the election?
The 5 most disturbing and concerning words that I hear over and over again, I heard during the last 8 years: I want my country back. Your country? And from who? From me? You want your country back from me? It's my country too. The permanent foreignization of 55 million Latinos, some of whom have been here far longer than the families of people who were saying, I want my country back. That is a really problematic thing. The cake's already baked. This country is on track to be a different place in the 2040s from the place it is today. And you can either get with it or resist it. And the 2016 election showed that there was a lot more resistance to that idea than a lot of the Obama and Clinton partisans thought there were. This country is going to be a majority-minority country at some time in the 2040s. What that means, the consequences of that, that's what we're going to fight about for the next 25 years. When Marc Anthony sings God Bless America at the All-Star game at Citi Field, And the Twitterverse blows up with people saying, why couldn't they get an American to sing God Bless America? Marc Anthony was born in New York and raised in New York. And somebody pointed out to him when a bunch of reporters met him to ask him about this Twitter controversy. They pointed out his parents were born in Yauco on the south coast of Puerto Rico. Well, he said, I hate to tell you, that's America too. My parents were born American citizens. That people would go onto Twitter and say, why couldn't they get an American to sing God Bless America, shows you something about their attitude toward what this country is and what it's going to become. That they can't grant Marc Anthony, who was born and raised in New York, the privilege of being an American. The idea that he can't sing God Bless America, which was written, let's remember, by a Jewish immigrant from the Soviet Empire, from the Tsarist Empire, excuse me. We let Irving Berlin be an American, but 75 years later, when Marc Anthony, who was born here, sings that song, he isn't given the privilege, the grace of being an American? Ay, ay, ay. We have a lot of arguments and a lot of fights ahead of us, and it's not going to get any easier. The 2016 election showed that.
I ask everybody in my interviews, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being great, what's your hope index for the future?
I am a hopeful and optimistic guy, and I always have been. But 10 is just not realistic. 7. I'd be real happy with 7, and I think most people would too.
Excellent. Ray Suarez, thanks very much.
Great to see you, Ted.
If Ray is flummoxed in the first 100 days, good luck to the rest of us making sense of the next 4 years. What I loved about our conversation is learning about Ray's dimensions as a journalist, a husband and father, and as an American of proud Puerto Rican descent. To understand his perspective is to understand where the country is headed, through inertia or a tug of war. Since the election, our podcasts have focused more on the anxiety created by Trump's victory. We found Karen, a first-generation Mexican-American, sobbing at a healing service on the night after the election.
As those states turned red, it was just like, I thought blood. I felt like I was watching America bleed.
And Tom, who was returning home for the holidays to face a fractured family whose members voted for opposing candidates.
Differences we've had in the past have been easy to overlook, but I feel like I won't be able to bite my tongue as much this time around, so a bit worried.
Hearing voices from real people is what this podcast is all about, but we're more than politics. I invite you to listen to inspiration I was surprised to find in every one of the people I've interviewed. Listen back from the beginning to the Front Porch Movement on your favorite podcast channel or our website, frontporchmovement.com. Then help us spread the word. Share it with your friends, follow us on social media, we're on all the sites, and write a review on iTunes. It'll raise our profile online and help others find us. Thanks for doing your part and for listening to the Front Porch Movement, a voice in civic engagement with stories that inform, connect, and inspire. I'm your host, Ted Canova. See you next time.